There's an old adage out there, and you've probably heard this a time or five, that everything old is new again. What do I mean by that? Well, in the case of this car behind me, Baltimore, Ohio's number 3316, better known as the Washington, the B&O took a huge gamble on passenger train service in the post-World War II era. And so they took a long-standing train, the Columbian, and they rebranded it as the new Columbian in 1949. Hi, this is Trevor from History on the Move, and I sure hope you have your favorite cup of coffee, tea, juice, whatever the heck you're drinking these days, in front of you, because this episode is going to be really good. We're going to have, I'm going to sit down with one of my good friends, Brian Davis, who really knows his stuff about time periods and design and architecture. He's going to walk us through some of the processes and the ideas as to why this car is designed on the interior the way that it is. So sit back and enjoy this. So before we get into the nooks and the crannies and the history and all the good stuff about 3316, better known as the Washington, why don't we let one of the 1940s and 50s preeminent railroad writers tell us a little about that. A gentleman by the name of S. Kip Farrington was an avid outdoorsman. He was a fisherman, loved anything to do with the sea, but he also loved railroads. He and his wife would travel railroads any place they could. They even went overseas. Anywhere he could ride the high iron, Mr. Farrington was there. And if you've been a railroad junkie or a railroad history person or a rail fan of any sorts, you've probably seen his books all over the place. They pop up they're just everywhere. And one of the ones that he wrote in 1952 was one called Railroading the Modern Way. And in here, he's got an entire chapter dedicated to the run that he took as a passenger on the new Columbian in 1949. It may have also been into the early 1950s. Hard to say because he doesn't say when he rode the train, but he has a great, he gives a great account of the entire train. But in this case, why don't we let Mr. Farrington tell us what his thoughts were about this car.
The new Columbian is a gleaming symphony in blue, gray, and gold. This is a striking color combination that leaves its imprint on the observer. I consider it one of the outstandingly beautiful trains in the United States. The arrangements are not overdone, and there is a comfortable but substantial look about the interiors. A lot of thought went into the layout. Nothing has been omitted throughout, and yet there is no feeling of overcrowding or congestion as you walk through such cars as the cocktail lounge or the colorful coffee shop section. Glamorous and strictly informal is the atmosphere of the congenial cocktail lounge on board this new Columbian. There are cheerful color tones and smart furnishings. You can play cards, enjoy a drink, have a part in the friendships that so easily spring up amid informal surroundings. We might say that this car could offer the highlight of your trip on some trains, but speeding through on this train, every car will leave something with you. Beyond the cocktail lounge, there's a stewardess-nurse's room. There are accommodations here for women and children requiring perhaps special attention. This kind of service is particularly appreciated by women traveling alone or women with children. Your stewardess-nurse is trained for her job, and on the Baltimore and Ohio, they have covered millions of miles in serving the traveler. When I'm not riding the head end, I like the lounge cars. In particular, I like the observation lounge on the Columbian. I like the overstuffed chairs set facing the wide windows where you can sprawl out and watch the scenery, or you can settle down on one of the deep cushioned sofas. There are also comfortable seats facing the curved rear windows. Of course, there are the newspapers and magazines and a writing desk. Like all cars of the train, the observation lounge has the last word in heating and air conditioning. Regardless of the weather, temperatures are maintained at exactly the right degree for personal comfort.
So the car that we're sitting in, the Washington, is actually a car that was built for the Columbian, the new Columbian. But what made it new? Well, we'll get into that in a minute. Let's talk about the old, right? You got new, you got to have the old. The old Columbian, or the original Columbian. So the original Columbian train from the Baltimore How debuted on May 24th, 1931. And the original route ran from Jersey City, up here, down to Washington, D.C. And its little claim to fame was that it was the first fully air-conditioned train in the United States. It originally started in 1930 with the dining car called the Martha Washington. It had been, they had attempted to put air conditioning in it in, the 2 years prior to 1930, so, 29 and part of 30, and they finally got it up and running in 1930, and they put it into the consist of the Columbian. And the neat thing here is that the Columbian ran as a competitor train, if you will, to the Pennsy. The Pennsy was also running a train. So if you've ridden Amtrak, the Northeast Corridor is the old Pennsylvania main line. And CSX, as it runs up and down the eastern seaboard, at least from D.C. North, for the most part is all B&O. So those two were massive competitors on the East Coast. And the Columbian it became so popular that eventually the Pennsy caught on, and they said in 1933, they said, we're going to air condition our own train because we need to compete with the B&O. So its competitor train that ran from New York to DC was also air conditioned in 1933. So that's pretty neat to point out. And, over time, this train, like I said, became very popular. And these were heavyweight cars. And, that was pretty stereotypical of the time period, in the 30s. And Daniel Willard, who was the president of the B&O during this time, and up until 1942, he was a huge advocate for heavyweight cars. So the Columbian would stay as a heavyweight train until this time, until this car that we're sitting in right now would debut. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. So the year is 1937. December to be exact, and this consist of the Columbian was running as a companion train to the Royal Blue, and the Royal Blue was the preeminent almost train that would take people from New York City down to DC, and eventually it would be reintroduced, the Columbian would, as a streamliner. And as a streamliner, this would have been very chic on the outside. It would not have been as, for lack of a better term, heavyweight looking. The heavyweight cars had a very, exposed river. You saw all kinds of stuff with them, and they just were not, as modern, if you will, towards the end of the 30s. So the PRR, so the Pennsylvania Railroad, also introduced their own streamliner called the Trailblazer. And this was the competitor to the Columbian, and the PRR put that out in 1939. So here's some neat, this I find the most fascinating piece of history about the Columbian. December 1941, literally 2 weeks or so after Pearl Harbor, right? Pearl Harbor was December 7th, 1941. 2 weeks or so after that, the B&O reintroduced Columbian as an all-coach train that ran from D.C. out to Chicago. So what is an all-coach train? Well, an all-coach train is there are no Pullman cars on board. So this gets into a different set. We'll talk about this in the Pullman Porters portion of this video, but Pullman cars were owned and operated by the Pullman Company. And Pullman had that kind of monopoly going on. But the railroads were also allowed to own their own cars, and the railroads would run them, and as well as staff those cars. So people in those cars were railroad employees. So wartime traffic, right? So, obviously the Columbian's running during the war, as were all the other trains out there, but the Columbian especially, really, to the point where they quadrupled the number of passengers that were riding out west to Chicago. Just ridiculous. But of course, that's because everybody was moving by train back then. It was a lot, the war effort really encouraged people to take trains. It's just it was the prime mode of transportation back then. So in 1945, towards the end of the war, the B&O finally dieselized the Columbian. So they would put on E units there, and that would be their their modernization. And the at that time though, as were most railroads at the time, they were running into this problem of, man, it's post-war now, 1945 into 46, and this thing is run down. Like, all of their train sets were just due for a makeover at this point. It really just ran them, pretty hard. And so December 1945, the B&O placed an order with Pullman Standard Company, and they wanted the B&O did, they wanted 2 all-new streamlined sets of coach trains. And they said, look, we want your latest, your greatest, and we're into this new modern era, right? And we want what you have that is cream of the crop. And so the B&O was actually one of the first railroads to place an order, and actually, put out bids, ask car manufacturers to put a bid in for their train set after the war. Kind of neat. So eventually B&O and Pullman Standard say, okay, we'll make these cars. We'll come to an agreement. And in May of 1949, both of these train sets debuted in the East. And the neat part about that is they were rebranded as the new Columbian. So that's kind of that 1949 now is our line of a change, of disembarkation now from the old, if you will, Columbian into the new Columbian. And each train costs the B&O Railroad $1 million. So think about that. The post-war period, the B&O really put themselves out there, again, because of the traffic that was going on during the war, as were most railroads were thinking, wow, this is just going to keep going. We're going to have just so many people riding the rails. Little did the railroads know that this thing called the interstate system, cars would become huge, the highways and the byways, and airlines would really, really start to take hold in the post-World War II era. But again, railroads didn't know that. They were looking at the last 2 or 3 years of the war and saying, oh man, we're totally going to make an investment in this. So the new, if you will, Columbian consisted of the observation lounge car, which we're in, a Stratodome car, which also had its own lounge. And what's neat about the Stratodome was that they were originally going to run this during the day, so people could sit in that dome and they could look out and they could see everything. But it was scheduled for, it was supposed to be an all-coach train that ran at night. It was an overnight train that essentially followed the Capital Limited from D.C. out to Chicago. So they had these massive lights on the top of the Stratodome car that would shine out, over the pastures and the towns or whatever to illuminate that stuff. So if you're sitting up there, you could see that. And they also consisted of a dining car and a coffee shop lounge car. So you could go up to, the attendant and say, yes, I'd like 1 cup of coffee, 2 sugars, no cream, whatever. Order your coffee however you like. And they had 4 coaches with what they called Sleepy Hollow reclining seats. I thought this was neat to read about because they had made these things so comfortable. They said that when you sat in them, you almost melted into the seats. That's how comfortable these coach seats were. And so that in itself, this is the timeline of the Columbian. And this is how we get to 1949 and the Washington. So now that we just talked about the history of the Columbian train set, and more importantly, the new Columbian train set, why don't we talk about the history of 3316, also known as the Washington. So again, it was built in 1949 as a observation tavern lounge car. And again, it served on the new Columbian from 1949 until 1958. 1958, it was transferred to the Ambassador service, which it ran. The Ambassador ran from Washington, D.C. out to Detroit. In 1961, this car, the Washington, would eventually become part of the Capital Limited run. And over the next decade or so, it kind of filled in wherever lounge car was needed, essentially in almost like a pool type service. And in 1971, the Washington eventually was retired from service and was donated right here to the B&O Railroad Museum. And this is where she has been ever since 1971. So what I find fascinating is just when you walk through here, and again, I always encourage people to come to the museum and come see this living history stuff for yourself. But when you do, and you walk through this car, think about the tens of hundreds of thousands of people that have ridden in this car, passengers that have sat in these very seats, walked through these aisles in the time frame that it debuted in 1949 until 1971. So what is it that makes this car so unique? Other than the fact that it is just a conglomeration of materials put together to take you, the passenger, from point A to point B. Well, if you were to ride this car and there were nobody else inside, you'd be kind of bored. You wouldn't have any service. There'd be no life to the car. The crew of the car is what gives it life. Let's talk about those people. So, as we said previously, this car, the Washington, or the 3316, a Tavern-Lounge-Observation car, was on the new Columbian. And the Columbian, the first iteration and the new iteration of it, were coach cars. So, meaning that all of these cars were owned and operated by the railroad, in this case, the Baltimore and Ohio. Now, this is a pretty wide swath, and I will fathom to say that any railroad that owns and operates its own cars, the crew members in those cars are also railroad employees. So in this car, there were no Pullman porters. There were no outside entities. The three people that made this car operate, that gave life to the car, if you will, were Baltimore and Ohio employees. And you would normally have somebody that attended to the bar. You know, somebody here, a bar attendant, that was normally a porter of some sort. Now, if you look through minutes of meetings about, you know, porters and unions and getting all that stuff together, you would read that, you know, the term porter is kind of interchangeable with other things. There was one I read that even said that there was a position called a porter brakeman. So again, these, you know, we're going to speak in generalities here, but an attendant is who would have been here, but they could have also operated as a porter. You would have also had somebody in the lounge area, and they were the lounge attendant. And at this time, what I will point out that is extremely unique is that the B&O itself had its own, we'll call it a school, an academy, if you will, of how to train its own Baltimore and Ohio Railroad employee porters. And that's highlighted right here in the September 1947 Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, the magazine for its employees. So it starts off in here. This is and it's a great article, and this is available on the Google Books. So I would highly recommend that you go out and find this one, or if you want to search the interwebs, however you find it. But I highly recommend that you look into it. But there was a training school for these folks. Yeah. So it starts off in October 1945, post-war, because they knew, the B&O knew that they were going to have a surge, or they were hoping, they were going to have a surge of people, passengers that were going to come through, and therefore they figured, well, if we're going to run these new coach trains of sorts, i.e. in 4 years' time, from 1945, 1949, the Columbian, the new Columbian, we need people to staff this train. And so they began the process to form this school in October of 45, and it was a hit. People came from all over the place. Now, again, mostly, Pullman porters, again, not on this train, were mostly African American, and a lot of the lounge car attendants were Filipino. They were of Filipino descent. And that also held true for the B&O employees that went to this school. And what I find really fascinating, though, is that if you read Virginia Tanner, is her name, who wrote this article, in the almost 2 years' time, right, October 45 is when the school started, and this was written in September of 47, the number of people that went into that school just began to climb. And they realized that we really have something here. We can teach people how to be good attendants to the car, teach them good customer service, how to clean properly, and all that. And that was super important to the B&O because that was their reputation. Any railroad's reputation was staked upon what you saw in the passenger car. So figured I'd point that out to you. That's pretty unique about the B&O, that they had their own school just for their porters and attendants, that were serving in cars like this. So why don't we move on and let's talk about the Stewardess-Nurse. So we just finished talking about the waiters and the attendants and the people out there in the Tavern-Lounge-Observation area, that their job was to make sure you had a drink in your hand, or you were relaxed and you had a magazine to read, or they were waiting on your every need. So you have a comfortable trip from A to B. But what happens if you have a medical emergency, or a colicky child, or a brand new baby, and you're a little nervous about traveling, or maybe perhaps you need a prescription filled. You forgot to bring your pills. Well, there was a position on this train and others that was called the Stewardess-Nurse. And how did they get their start? Let's talk about that. So it's the end of the 1920s in America. What's going on? This thing called the Great Depression. Everybody's depressed. Why? They can't get a job. And so nurses were not immune to this either. Registered nurses were having a hard time finding work. So the airlines, who were still making a little bit of money, began to employ them as stewardesses on board the airplanes. The Ford Trimotors and the other primitive planes that were flying at that time. And so this is a great thing. They're registered nurses that are now employed. But now the railroads look at this and they go, all right, we got you, airlines. So Union Pacific puts a call out, and they hired multiple registered nurses, and they brought them on board their trains. So in 1935, the Union Pacific puts their first nurse stewardess, was what they called it, on the Challenger, a train that roamed the plains out west there for Union Pacific. And this was the first time, and it was so well received. The public was just astounded. This was a fantastic thing, because if you had a medical emergency, or like I said, a colicky child, or you didn't feel so well, or you just needed some type of nurse, somebody with just that comfort, if you will, that is already in their personality, you were in the right place. And so the B&O followed suit, and in April of 1937, on the Shenandoah train, numbers 9 and 10, the B&O debuted what they called their Stewardess-Nurse. They just flip them around. See how we did that? And that's what the B&O called them. And again, they also had, just like Union Pacific did, and other railroads that employed, stewardess-nurses, nurses, stewardesses, that they had very stringent requirements for these people. One of the requirements was you had to be a member of the American Nursing Association. So you didn't necessarily have to be a registered nurse. It helped, but you didn't have to be that. But it sure, like I said, it surely helped. And they had some of these railroads also made them take a personality test to make sure that you were able to work with people, and particularly people's personalities. You had to have this calm demeanor to you at all times, because you were basically in a customer service position. And there were other things. There were also height requirements and weight requirements, and most, if not all, I would say all of them, had to be white women. Why? Because that was what the railroads put out at the time. This is history, folks. Sometimes it's uncomfortable when we have to talk about it. But they employed only very slender white women that had to be between certain weights, and so they could fit into the uniform like the one behind me. And so this is a new thing. And if you read any of the B&O employee magazines, the nurses graced, the stewardess nurses graced multiple covers of these. And if you read inside, I have to say I've gone through several of these, and there are numerous accounts from passengers writing to the B&O saying, this was phenomenal. My stewardess nurse was amazing. They helped me out. I had a child that was running a fever. One that just helped me with my prescription. I didn't understand it. Or I read so many accounts, and they all received just rave reviews. And what was really neat is in my own collection, I have one of these, which is a actual business card from one of these people. So yes, they would carry their own little card. And this is Miss Dorothy Sell, stewardess nurse. I did a little bit of digging about her. It's hard to find information about her, but she was a stewardess nurse on the St. Louis route. So that was her home terminus. And I know, the only real concrete facts I could find was that she got married in 1951. And when they wrote the byline, they totally forgot to write her soon-to-be husband's name in it. So, But I think that's rather fascinating, and that's just that was what helped the B&O kind of get over the Great Depression. That's one of the many things, to help sell their customer service and say, look, we've got this too. All right, folks, so I promised you that we're going to sit down and talk with my good buddy, Brian Davis. Brian, thanks for joining me here. Tell the people out there in YouTube land who you are and why you're here to talk to us.
Oh my goodness, I don't know that I have time for that, but I'll do my best. So actually my day job is researching classic car values for a well-known online classic car market. But I spent many years as an antiques dealer, and that's kind of where, and it's just as a general student of history, especially of the 20th century. So that's kind of my bona fides and why I'm here.
Tell me about the car, right? So you and I have walked into this car, we've looked around, and it's this car, let me say it right now, this car is not Art Deco, but it is
Streamline Moderne or Art Moderne. The terms are interchangeable, and I think it's fair to say that aesthetic was a descendant of Art Deco, but there's a number of very important differences between the two styles that I'm going to point out as we move along.
Okay, and tell me, so let's start with Art Deco is obviously one that predates.
Yeah, and only by a few years, and it wasn't even known as Art Deco at the time, but there was a...
What do they call it?
It was just known as the style. Like they didn't even have a name for it yet. It was subsequent students of design history that applied the name Art Deco, and there was an exhibition in Paris in 1925, the name of which escapes me, and my French pronunciation is not going to allow me to say, but it was an exhibition of art and design, and that exhibition its name got extrapolated into Art Deco, and that's where the name came from. But the style itself, true Deco, is really delineated by an emphasis on the vertical line, geometry, angles, and a very common motif in Art Deco is a zigzag. You have lots of sharp angles, and you'll have like massed cubes, one in front of another, to kind of give a stair-step or ziggurat effect. That's Art Deco. Streamline Moderne, if you take that sort of same thing and radius the corners and place the emphasis on the horizontal rather than the vertical, and that's when we start getting into Streamline Moderne. And smoothing off the edges, it really started to happen, I'm speaking in a very general way, but in the 1930s, whereas Art Deco with the strong angularity was 1920s and into the early 30s, but as we started to progress into the mid to late 1930s, that's when we really started to see streamlining. Designs needed to look as though they were sculpted by the wind. Whether or not they had any true aerodynamic benefit was irrelevant, but you started to see teardrop forms, and again, those radiused corners, smooth. And rather than really pronounced decorations, you'd have flat planes and just, very subtle lines and subtle chasing, a kind of a streamlining even of ornamentation. There was less of it, and the forms themselves and the color and the subtle trim did all the work.
So would you say that Streamline or Art Moderne, whatever term you choose to use, is that we'll call it a less in-your-face version of Art Deco? Is that a fair statement?
I think that's a very fair statement, because to me, one of the hallmarks of the design of Art Moderne is its subtlety. And it still can be quite striking, but it has a generally cohesive feel.
Okay. And you happen to bring some props with you today. Let's talk about those. I really want to give us a visual as to what this stuff looks like.
I'm happy to. So I have here a jewelry casket. This is French Art Deco from probably the mid to late 1920s.
Okay.
And you have vertical lines emphasized all around. The overall form is geometric. And while we do have a stylized floral motif here on the lid, it's carefully controlled with these geometric borders. So this is Art Deco.
That's Art Deco.
And it's actually one of my favorite little treasures that I've had over the years.
Okay.
And then here is Streamline Moderne or Art Moderne. This is a Sunbeam T9 toaster. This was introduced in 1939. I think they have one of these in MoMA. I have one of them in the Breakfast Nook. And if you'll notice, there's not a corner on it, everything is gently radiused. And while,
even the handles.
Exactly, everything. And there is some subtle chased line decor on here, but it's minimal. Like look at the decoration on this. It's all quite dramatic. On the toaster here, it's very integrated, very smooth. And then of course we've got the black plastic handles and base to give some contrast to the stainless steel exterior, but it's smooth, nothing jarring about it.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, with that said, folks, why don't Brian and I will take you through this car. We're going to have Brian point out a few things that make this car in that style of art moderne. All right, Brian. So here we are inside of the car. Take it away. Let's go for a tour.
Sure. So as I was talking about the differences between Art Deco and Art Moderne, one of the big clues that something is Art Moderne versus Art Deco is an emphasis on the horizontal line. A railroad car is, of course, by its very design,
one big long line.
Correct. And if you look down the car here, you can see that horizontality emphasized. We have horizontal ribbing. We have, and instead of a bunch of ornate decor, we just have subtle bands of beautiful veneers and restful colors. But they didn't want it to be too much of a tunnel, so we have it broken up again with the curvilinear bar.
Oh, okay.
And we have curvilinear bunkettes, not individual seating. And then again, just to prevent it from being too much of a tunnel, we do have just a little relief in these etched glass panels before we go into the observation lounge, where again, rather than an old-time open-end observation car, we had sort of a back porch, so to speak, but on this car, it tapers smoothly. And I'd also like to draw your attention to the lighting. So think back to very early passenger cars. You might have ceiling fixtures almost like in a private home. Here, the lighting is integrated, and notice we have this curved, curve,
Oh,
and
okay.
again, smoothly integrated. Nothing is jarring to the eye. It just flows very well together. And again, on the back wall, the kind of focal point is this wonderful gold tone mirror. We'll also have gold tone mirrors behind the bar. And then this lovely mural of the cherry blossoms and Washington Monument. Again, to tie into this car's use going into the nation's capital. But aesthetically, we have this very, I want to say refined, but not formal space, and a dark blue carpet to ground it all, contrasted with burgundy, which is very much a la mode for the period.
Okay, and the color that we see on the walls, the paint, this is keeping in the art moderne?
Very much so. The color palette of this style would be grays, burgundies, light blues, mint green. And I should also point out that this car, having been built in 1949, that's really getting to the tail end of that. It wouldn't be too much longer, and popular taste would move on to what we now think of more as mid-century modern. But rail cars didn't all follow that because they're very, very expensive. And just after the war was kind of the last flowering of the major lines buying lots of passenger equipment. So a lot of this art moderne streamline rail equipment ran until 1971, and a lot of it even ended up in the hands of Amtrak. I don't know if this particular car did. I wouldn't think so, just based on its past here. Trevor can enlighten you there. But rail cars, a lot of them have maintained that art moderne aesthetic because the style just didn't move on. There was no need to. Airlines took over.
And the wood paneling, this is keeping too with it?
Very, very much so. Again, rather than like ornate florals or ornate sculpting, they would just use smooth, lovely planes of veneer. If any of you have been to Radio City Music Hall in New York City, you'll know what I mean. Or a lot of movie theaters will have that. My hometown of Fresno, we have a beautiful art moderne movie theater, the Tower. And again, we have all these gentle curves in that building and big planes of lovely wood veneer and very minimal ornamentation.
Now, hypothetically, if this car was Art Decoed, what would give us an idea of what that could look like?
All right, well, again, so we would have a lot more ornamentation. Where we have wood veneer here, we might well have like a zigzag frieze.
Ah, yes. Okay.
And you know, I must say too, you don't really see many Art Deco American rail cars because you had the heavyweight equipment that sort of lasted into the 30s and beyond.
Yes,
and then when they started updating and they really felt they need to kind of put some pizzazz back in the lines, by the time that happened, Deco was a little bit passé. That's why when you see streamlining and the streamlined car sets railroads were ordering in the early to mid and late 30s, they went with more of a streamlined modern look, less that was curvilinear, not rectilinear.
Now, something that would probably point out here, and I'll put this on camera with this, is, so when I think, you've been to Cincinnati Union, sir, have you not?
No, I have not been to Cincinnati Union.
But you've seen pictures?
Yes, I have.
So I've seen it in person, and that's about as Art Deco as you could possibly get. Is that a fair
Well, no,
assumption?
that's the one where the terminal has got rounded.
So that's Streamline
Moderne.
I was wrong.
But again, as I also mentioned, Streamline Moderne, it does aesthetically have its roots in Deco. You can almost think of it as its beginning as Deco with the corners rounded off. And then it became more and more minimal as time went on. And again, I attribute this to the fascination the public had with air travel and things like the teardrop shape of an airplane's fuselage. There was cutting edge stuff in the 30s. And so your cars started to become streamlined. Your household appliances started to become streamlined. Your rail cars started to become streamlined. And like I said, this is 1949, and it was, again, kind of the last flowering of that style.
So if you had to pick out let's go with a building, right? Because rail cars were not really Art Deco, but if you had to pick out a quintessential Art Deco building.
The Chrysler Building in New York. And
fair enough.
It just kind of epitomizes it. And it was Radio City Music Hall, which, again, around the same time, is much more leaning into the streamlined modern aesthetic, less Art Deco.
Ah, okay. Very good. Well, I have to say, I am super impressed. And as always, Brian, I cannot thank you enough for walking around and giving us this. This is just two history lovers just doing what they do best. So stay tuned for some more really good information about the Washington. Okay, so I'm on the ground here with the Washington, or the 3316, whichever you choose to call her. Let's get some details about her from the outside, and then we'll go inside and have a look-see as well. And we'll point out some neat and fun things and stuff, so when you come here and you see it, you know what you're looking at. All right, let's start off with on the boat tail side. So yes, that is a Mars light up there. We'll start with that. And we'll start down here. This is your steam line, because in 1949, when this car was built, you would have still had steam heat. Let's see, you have so between the two airlines here, the smaller one here, this is your signal line. That's this smaller guy here. And the fatter one here, the larger one, that is your train line for the brakes. And there are your angle cocks as well. So, and of course, your cut lever for the coupler. Crab irons, and again, some of the stuff you've probably, if you watch this channel for any length of time, you know that we covered this stuff in restoration reviews. So I'd highly encourage that you go back, and if you want to learn a little bit more about that stuff, go back and look there. So again, this came straight from Pullman Standard with roller bearings already on it. And so, the suspension, as you can see, would have been this would have been a beautiful ride, just smooth. You have coil springs. I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you have coils inside of coils. So you talk about a smooth ride, I'd say this is it. So keep moving here to the museum. This would be heading east. These are your battery boxes here. And this is your plug-in for DC power in order to charge said batteries. So when you're in the station, let's say Washington Union Station, and obviously we'll get to why you need that in a minute, but as soon as you come to a stop, you start to kind of lose power, and so you need to be able to recharge your batteries, because your batteries are going to be providing the power as it sits stationary. So that long line here is your main line for your air. And let's keep moving here. So that is one of your air reservoirs right there. This is kind of neat to point out. So this had air conditioning at the time, and this is an electric motor that drives your compressor. How cool is that? So an electrically powered motor that would spin, and then you can see the pulleys here and the multiple V belts that are in there. And that would then spin the AC compressor that's here. And if we follow, let's see, which line was I following? We follow this line here. So this line, whoops, here, oop, let me get you some light. It is a wee bit dark in here. So this line here is what comes out, and this is what goes down and around, and this is what continues back here and goes behind this guy, and this is your condenser unit here. So you have two fans inside. There's a good view. Two fans inside that spin and help to pull air through there, thus dissipating the heat. And so that, you have two condensers and two fans. And I'll tell you what, I'll leave the light on for this so we can see. Here's something I find, I always get nerdy about stuff like this, but this is how you would generate power, electricity, while you're running. So you have a huge differential, essentially right here, and you have a gear inside there, basically like your car, where you have a ring that goes this way and a pinion that would go this way. So as the ring spins, there's teeth on there, and that spins the pinion gear. Pinion gear turns, and through that universal joint right there, just like on your car or your truck, comes through a drive shaft and then spins this massive, massive generator. So, and you got to think too, is on a car like this, the amount of electricity, as you see when we go inside, the amount of electricity, the lights, the air conditioning, I mean, just the insane amount of electricity this thing consumes, you kind of need something like this. So that always fascinates me. And again, you know, this is the east-facing truck here, and just a beautiful, beautiful ride is what I can only imagine here. And so we'll walk along. This would be the, if you're at the museum, this is the east end of the car here. And again, steam heat line. This is your signal line, and that is your train line. And a really good shot, and we'll get inside in just a second, but let's see what we can see on the other side. The only real thing I can tell you just from obviously preemptively looking through this is the only thing that's of real note here that I want to point out, because essentially what you see on one side you kind of see on the other. You got a battery box here, another air reservoir, another air reservoir, and this guy is your D22 brake valve. And what's neat about those is that these, as opposed to the AB brake or the ABD or any of those other, the freight brake essentially, these have a graduated release. So, you know, it's not just and, you know, the brakes release rather quickly. This is a slow release, so that way the engineer has time to kind of load the locomotive, kind of get it moving, then slowly release the brakes. That way you're not just boom, and you have slack action going all over the place. So that's kind of cool, but again, that's the D22 brake valve. Why don't we go up inside and have a look-see? All right, so I'm up in the vestibule here on the east-facing side of the car. Here's your hand brake, and it's a wheel brake. As you pull on that, then you can see the directions here as you spin this way, that you apply it, so you're pulling on the chain down below, and therefore pulling out the slack and setting the brakes by hand. And if you want to release it, well, you go the other way. Now you're putting slack on that chain, thereby releasing the brakes. And pretty stereotypical vestibule. Not really a whole lot to point out here. So this is kind of some neat stuff here. Let's go inside. Turn off the light. So this is the female's bathroom. And so this would have been the men's room. And this is the females' bathroom. So you have, you know, your hot, cold soap dispenser here. And again, so something to point out here, just like the sign says, please do not flush toilet while train is standing or passing through station. Why? Well, because if you were to do what you do here and what you do here, these are just gravity going directly onto the tracks below. This is before the invention of containment or retention toilets and things like that, that essentially Amtrak kind of brought into the more modern age here. But yes, so if you were to flush this, some track worker, poor track worker down the line is going to have a not so fun day when he's got to replace ties and whatnot. So pretty not so fun stuff to get involved in. So here you have, so this is just moving east here, you would have your cool storage here. Now on the outside of the car there is also you can see the refrigeration there a lot better, but let me turn my light on so you can see what we got here. So this is pretty neat. You could store most likely alcohol bottles in here, beer, wine, what have you. And you can see the coils back here for the refrigeration. So yeah, this would have been all of your cool storage, cold storage. Keep moving here. And over here is, oh, that does not want to open. Yes, it does. Over here would have been the same thing, and you can see there's the squirrel cage for the unit here. And so this would have been where the unit itself was. And again, that's why you see the keys on there like that. So the unit would have sat right in here. There's the louver panel that is to the outside. And so yeah, but the unit is no longer here. But this would have been what kept everything cool inside. All right, so the main electrical panel is also right here. So we've made a little turn around the corner, and here are all of your electrical components in here. And again, this was retroed, so now that the car's on display, it can run off 120 AC. So this is kind of neat. I'm always fascinated by stuff like this. And as we've talked about, if you watch Restoration Review, you know this is the Stewardess-Nurse room. And we'll get into the history of that. That's kind of a fun little thing to point out. Let's keep moving here. So as we go down the hall, oh, this is also, so every car has to have an emergency kit in here. So you'd have a handsaw, you have your first aid supplies, and there's also a fire extinguisher. So, and this again, would have came standard with the car. You know, rail cars, just like homes back then and other places that were, you know, they were primed. They were just, you know, open to fires. It just happens. And so we'll keep moving here. We have your thermostat here. This is kind of your relay back, if you will, to the unit to tell how cool or how hot it is in the car. And as you turn the corner here, bada boom, here it is. So now we are into this is the cocktail lounge, or the tavern area really is what it is. So this is kind of cool. I always found this fascinating that, you know, they would have an attendant here to wait on you, you know, whatever your drink of choice is. You could have a drink, you could come in, you could sit down, you know, in these very plush, you know, couches here. You get to look at the cherry blossoms over here. This is pretty neat stuff. And this always fascinated me because, again, this is time period. People were not sitting on their iPhones or their iPads or their whatevers, but this was the magazine and the newspaper rack. So you would come in, walk in, oh, let me get whatever it is, and I will go sit down and I will read the paper, or I will go read the Time magazine or Fortune or whatever the heck you were reading back in the Saturday Evening Post. So this would have been your, again, this is kind of keeping in the tavern cocktail area here. And so as you would say, you could even sit down and play a game of cards. But here's where our line of, we'll call it disembarkation is. So this would get into your lounge area. And you'd have chairs just like you see here. And, you know, this is really neat. And they're going to put eventually they're going to put the tops on these, but this, you'd have lighting so you could sit here, you know, you could play cards, you could just relax, you could, heck, have a snooze. So, again, you'd have seats here too. If you look at the original plan, there were seats that went all along here as well. The blueprints for this thing showed that. And you have your two-seater little seat back here, and that would allow you, if you were to close the door, because that would certainly not be open while this thing was running, but this would have been the view that you get. You can literally just sit here and watch the countryside go by. How cool is that? So one of the key components to bring you these episodes as a history major is to cite your sources. I say that every episode, but it's key. You have to cite your sources. And where did that come from? Well, I used to have a history professor years ago named Dr. Robert Rook. And I used to sit there in his office and have historical discussions and whatnot with him. And I would make some argument. And he'd say, that's great, Trevor, that's great. But you need to cite your sources. And I said, okay. So here we go. For this episode, I went every episode I go all out. But this one took a lot of resources to bring you this content. And as you can see, I am piled with stuff. But let's start off with, if you want to learn more about, so remember the new Columbian was a coach train, all coach, no Pullman cars. If you want to learn more about that, I cannot recommend enough Coach Trains and Travel by Patrick C. Dorn. He talks about the new Columbian in there. Great photos, black and white. But they're great. It's a great write-up about coach trains in general in the United States. If you want to learn more about the new Columbian as a whole, or the Columbian, the two iterations of it prior to the new Columbian in '49, there's some great things here. This is a very condensed, very short, easy to read. Baltimore, Ohio Railroad, Kirk Reynolds, David Orazi. Great read. Easy to get through, and again, it's something that you're not going to sit there and it's not painstaking. Speaking of painstaking, but a good painstaking, if you want really good details. Now remember the Columbian, the later iterations followed the Capital Limited. It was basically a follow-up train, but it was the coach version of that. And how do we find more about that? Well, normally books that reference the Capital Limited will reference the Columbian. In this case, Baltimore, Ohio Passenger Service, 1945 to 1971, Volume 2, The Route of the Capital Limited, Harry Stegmeyer. Woo! You talk about some details. Let me tell you, Mr. Stegmeyer can get into some details. And if you really want all the weeds, you want to get so deep into this stuff, this is what you want. This will not lead you astray. It's a great book about the Capital Limited, the Columbians in there. Multiple other trains that basically follow that route are in this book. So if you want to get deep into the weeds and things of the brand of the bearings on the car and this, that, and the other, this is your guide. If you want a little bit lighter version of that, that's what we'll call it. I cannot recommend enough Baltimore, Ohio's Capital Limited and National Limited by Joe Welsh. Joe Welsh is a phenomenal writer. Essentially, I would say this. This is the condensed version of Mr. Stegmeyer. This is great, this is to the point, but Mr. Welsh is a wonderful writer. I found all of this stuff, all of this around me, super helpful. So if you want to learn more about stewardess-nurses, there's two key things that I use that were really good. Classic Trains magazine, this is an older issue called Working on the Railroad. They have an entire article about how stewardess-nurses, nurse-stewardesses, whatever iteration you want to call them, came to be. So that was very, very helpful. And I also had a really good article by the University of Virginia School of Nursing called Flashback Friday, the Heyday of the Nurse Stewardess. Great read, short, it's condensed, it's to the point, and right here, now granted, it's the University of Virginia, they have no biases, but they happen to put the B&O on there, and especially the Shenandoah, because as we said, the numbers 9 and 10 in 1937, were the first ones to have that on there. So I think that's awesome, and this was super helpful. Maura Singleton is the writer. Did a great job, Maura. And also to that note, there are numerous B&O employee magazines out there. There are piles of these things. Find them wherever you can. But these just about every one of these will have a write-up in them about a stewardess-nurse that went above and beyond, or just talks about them in a general nature. So those are super helpful. If you can find brochures about these things, these are super helpful as well. They really help you understand what's going on. This one provided so many pictures. The timetable was in there, and this came out as soon as the new Columbian was inaugurated in 1949. And if you're looking, so something that I used to help me find later color photos of 3316 or the Washington was Bob Withers. I absolutely love Bob Withers. I cannot say enough good things about the man. Great writer, awesome railroad historian, big time rail fan, and he was definitely a preeminent photographer back in the day. But he has this book, the B&O C&O, in color. And Mr. Withers has several photographs that I used in this to help illustrate 3316 of the Washington. So, make sure you get out there and be decisive in your sources when you go to look through this stuff and parse through it. And if I'm not here to sell you anything. I don't want people to go wherever you buy your books. But please buy your books. Please don't steal them. And if you borrow them from somebody, please return them. Nobody likes books that just grow legs and boop, 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 boop. They just walk right off and then they never come home again. Nobody likes that. So be a good steward of your books. So a friendly little note out there. If you want to see these cars for yourself, 3316, known as the Washington, is right here at the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Museum, or the B&O Railroad Museum, whichever you prefer. If you want to go see the 3315, the sister, the Chicago, that's out in Covington, Kentucky, in a yard known as the Railway Museum of Greater Cincinnati. Now, I will forewarn you that the Chicago is worse for wear. That's probably the polite way of putting it. It does not look very good. It's not even close to what the Washington looks like. But just to kind of put that out there, that both the Washington and the Chicago are still here. Neither one has been scrapped, but if you want to make that pilgrimage, if you will, out to Covington, Kentucky, you can walk right up to the Chicago. Again, it doesn't look that great, but at least you can say that you saw it. And if you want to come see the Washington, please come here to the B&O Railroad Museum and see it for yourself. Wow. So much information to digest in this, and I really hope that you're able to enjoy this episode. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I had fun making it for you. And this has been kind of a love affair for me. I've been able to watch this car come through the process of being, pulled from the North Car Shop and then brought here, and I've got to watch and partake a wee bit in the restoration of this. And again, get out there and watch those restoration reviews. We chronicle this car, I think, pretty stinking good. You get to see the craftsmanship of George Harwood and Jamie Partridge and the others, the outside contractors that have come in to partake and help bring this car back to life. So huge shout out to those guys for allowing me to inhabit their world. And we learned a lot as well about the difference between B&O porters and Pullman porters. We learned all about stewardess-nurses and the vital role that they played on cars like this and on trains like the Capital Limited and the Columbian. And big shout out to my buddy Brian Davis. I cannot thank you enough, my friend, for coming down here to the museum and sitting here with me and just giving me a wonderful, wonderful introspective look as to how this car, styling-wise, came to be. So this is Trevor from History on the Move. Get out there, read history, explore history, but most importantly, you make your own history. I'll see you on the next one.